I need you to understand what the convergence ball actually was before you try to make sense of what happened at it. Every 4 years, the major powers of the Galactic Compact send representatives to a neutral station for what is officially called a cultural exchange summit. In practice, it is a ball. A very expensive, very politically loaded ball where every species that matters sends its most prestigious members to stand in a room together and pretend that they are not constantly calculating advantage. The food is extraordinary. The music changes every hour to accommodate different auditory ranges. The lighting is adjusted in rotating cycles, because 3 of the attending species cannot see in the same spectrum. Station Aurelius was chosen for this cycle because it sits at the intersection of 4 trade lanes and technically belongs to no single species. It is administered jointly, which means in practice it is administered by an enormous bureaucratic apparatus that is constantly arguing with itself. And the station runs remarkably well despite this, because the arguing keeps everyone too busy to do anything genuinely corrupt. The ball itself takes place in what we call the Grand Convergence Hall. It is the largest interior space on the station, 600 meters across, with a ceiling that opens into a transparent dome so attendees can see the star field. We have standing capacity for approximately 4,000 guests. That night, we had 3,712 registered attendees from 41 species. Among those 41 species, the Dacath were the ones everyone watched. I want to be careful how I describe this because I'm a protocol officer and I am supposed to be impartial. So let me simply say, the Dacath are a very old species. They are exceptionally powerful militarily and economically. They are exceptionally aware of this. And the word that most diplomatic staff use privately, not officially, not in any report but privately, over drinks after a long shift is insufferable. They call themselves vampire kind in the old translations, though that word carries connotations they find insulting. Their formal designation is the Dacath sovereignty. Their king at the time of the Convergence Ball was Kael Sovrath. He had been king for approximately 400 years, which for his species is relatively young. He was, by any objective measure, one of the 3 most powerful individuals in the Galactic Compact. He walked into the Convergence Hall that night like he had already decided how every moment of it would go. He was not wrong to think that. He had attended 6 of these events before. They always went the same way. Until they didn't. Station Security Log, Aurelius Grand Convergence Hall. Entry Timestamp, GS 4891, 247-19-04. Facility check complete. All catering staff present and accounted for, 214 personnel. All have undergone interspecies sensitivity briefing. All carry dietary restriction badges for cross-contamination prevention. Kitchen clearance, full. Service entrance protocol, active. Note, 1 replacement staff member added at 18:47 to cover absence of contracted server Mivtala health clearance revoked, Breathian dust allergy. Replacement, Lena Vasquez human contract grade C7 general kitchen and service staff. Clearance verified. Badge issued. All systems nominal. Event commences in 56 minutes. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez, recovered with her permission and included by her consent. I don't know why I'm writing this. Habit, I guess. I've kept a journal since I was 12 and I don't really know how to process things without putting them down somewhere. So, tonight was the Convergence Ball. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was supposed to be in Sublevel Kitchen 4 doing prep work for the staff canteen. But Miv went home sick, and they needed someone to carry trays in the main hall, and my supervisor, Torvin, he's Brilliant, big guy, 4 arms, always smells like cinnamon for reasons I've never asked about. He looked down the row of us and pointed at me. Vasquez, you're tall. They need someone tall for the upper service tier. That was the whole selection process. I'm tall. I'm 5'9", which for a human woman is not extraordinary, but apparently the upper service tier has shelving at a height that makes it awkward for the shorter staff. So that's how I ended up in the Grand Convergence Hall on the most politically significant night on Station Aurelius in 4 years, wearing a service uniform that was slightly too big in the shoulders, and carrying a tray of something called Threnic wine that costs more per bottle than I make in a month. I had one job: stay invisible, refill glasses, don't make eye contact with anyone important, don't drop anything. I did 3 of those 4 things. From the deposition of Ambassador Cora Thesson, Meridian Republic Delegation. I have attended 4 convergence balls. I am a professional diplomat with 22 years of experience. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that I am not easily surprised, and I am not prone to exaggeration. What happened that night surprised me. The ball began conventionally enough. The arrival sequence for high-status delegates was handled in the standard order. Species are announced in alphabetical order by their compact designation, which sidesteps the status argument that would otherwise consume 3 days of pre-event negotiation. The Dacath were announced 7th. King Kale Sovrath entered with his full retinue, 12 honor guard in formal chromatic armor, his 3 senior advisors, and a collection of court members whose titles I did not have time to memorize, but who all wore the same expression of refined contempt that seems to be standard issue for Dacath nobility. The king himself was, I want to be accurate about this, genuinely striking. I don't mean that as a compliment to his character, which I have complicated feelings about. I mean it as a factual observation. The Dacath are physically impressive. Sovrath stood at approximately 2 meters in some. The skin of his species has a peculiar quality in light, not quite pale, not quite luminous, something in between. His eyes are the deep dark red that indicates full maturity in Dacath biology. He wore formal sovereignty dress, which is a kind of structured black and silver that takes 3 tailors and 2 days to put on properly. He moved through the room the way very powerful people move through rooms when they know everyone is watching. Unhurried, aware, processing. The first hour of the ball was standard, mingling, music. The Gravathi played their traditional wind instruments in the east corner, which sounds extraordinary if you're in the right mood, and like a large building slowly falling over if you're not. The food was remarkable. I ate something from the Selanth homeworld that I think may have changed my understanding of what flavor can be. The wine flowed. The conversation was careful and layered in the way that all conversation is at these events, where every sentence has 3 meanings and you're constantly translating. The Dacath delegation kept to themselves, which was not unusual. Sovrath circulated, performed the necessary acknowledgments, received the various approaches from junior delegates who wanted to be seen speaking with him. He was correct, formal. Slightly bored in the way that people are bored when they are too important to be surprised by anything. And then the dancing started. Part 2, the dance floor the moment the girl. From the deposition of Torvin Kell, catering supervisor, Aurelia Station Services. I will be honest. When I pointed at Vasquez for the main hall, I was not thinking. I needed someone tall. She was tall, decision made. She had worked for station services for about 7 months at that point. Good worker. Reliable. Quiet, not shy exactly. More like she was always thinking about something else. She did her work and she did it well, and she did not cause problems, which in catering is the highest praise I can give. I stationed her on the upper service tier, which runs along the north side of the hall at a slightly elevated position. It's for glassware service primarily. She would be moving along that tier, keeping glasses filled, staying out of the way of the delegates below. Easy posting. Invisible posting. I checked on her at roughly the 2-hour mark. She was doing fine, moving correctly, not making eye contact with anyone, handling the Threnic wine properly. I went back to coordinating the main floor service. The first I knew anything had gone differently was when my comm unit lit up with 6 simultaneous priority notifications. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. The dancing started around the 2-hour mark. They had this whole sequence for it, different music for different species, rotating through, so that everyone got a turn with something their biology could move to. The Gravathi danced in these slow, spiraling patterns that were actually beautiful to watch. The Thelian delegates did something that looked like controlled falling, which I understand is considered very athletic for them. There was a species in the far corner, I don't know what they were called, who danced by vibrating at frequencies I could feel in my teeth. I was doing my job, moving along the tier, refilling glasses when they needed it, watching the floor below the way you watch things when you're supposed to be invisible, present but not present, if that makes sense. The Dacath section was directly below and to my left. King Sovrath was standing at the edge of the dance floor, not dancing, observing. He had this quality of complete stillness that I noticed early in the evening. Most people at a party have a restlessness to them, even when they're standing still. They shift weight, glance around, adjust something. He just existed in one place, like a sculpture that happened to breathe. I had noticed him the way you notice something that has gravity. Not because I was staring, I was trying very hard not to stare at anyone, but because he was the kind of presence that registers peripherally even when you're looking elsewhere. I was reaching past a support column to refill a glass on the far end of my tier when my foot caught the edge of the access panel. I should explain, the upper service tier has access panels every 8 meters for the maintenance conduits beneath. They're flush with the floor latched, never a problem, except someone, and I genuinely do not know who, and the station maintenance report never figured it out either, had left the latch on panel 7C partially open. Not open enough to see, just open enough that the edge caught my boot. I did not drop the tray. I want to be clear about that. I was very proud of not dropping the tray. What I did do was stumble. A hard, lurching stumble where I grabbed the support column with my free hand, and the wine bottle I was holding swung out and then back, and I overcorrected. And for about 2 full seconds I was doing something that I can only describe as a controlled disaster. And I made a sound. Not a scream, more like a sharp, involuntary "oh" that in a quieter room would have been nothing. But the music had just shifted between sets. There was a gap of about 4 seconds between pieces. In that gap, my stumble and my "oh" were the loudest things in the convergence hall. Everyone looked up. From the deposition of Ambassador Korathessin. I heard it before I saw it. That little sound, it wasn't much, but in the gap between the Gravathi piece and whatever came next, it carried. I turned toward the upper tier along with, it seemed, most of the room. A human service worker, young, dark hair pulled back in the service style. She had grabbed a support column and was clearly in the process of recovering from a stumble, holding a wine bottle at an alarming angle that she then corrected with visible effort. She had not dropped anything. She had not fallen. She was perfectly all right. For about 3 seconds, the room watched her recover. And then, and I say this as someone who was present and heard it directly, someone in the Dacath delegation laughed. Not a quiet laugh, not a polite, involuntary sound, a deliberate laugh. I saw who it was. One of the younger court members, a male, standing just behind the king's right shoulder. He said something in Dacath that I only partially caught. My Dacath is functional but not fluent, but the tone was unmistakable. It was the laugh of someone mocking an inferior. Within 2 or 3 seconds, that laughter had spread. Not through the whole room, not by any means, but through the Dacath delegation, and then to several of their allies, and there was a ripple of it, that specific social sound that is less about finding something funny and more about performing the judgment of finding something beneath notice. The girl on the tier had straightened up completely by then. Her face was, I watched it, because I'm a diplomat and I watch faces, carefully composed. The kind of careful that is controlled embarrassment. She adjusted her grip on the wine bottle and turned to continue her route along the tier, and I thought, that's the end of it. She'll finish her shift. It'll be a story she tells. But then King Sovrath did something. The young court member, identified as Priest Sultan, can be seen laughing and making a remark. The remark, translated, "These kitchen creatures can't even stand upright." 3 other members of the delegation laugh. The laugh spreads to 2 members of the Vardosian observer group. King Kale Sovrath turns his head and looks at Priest Sultan for approximately 2 seconds. His expression does not change. He then turns his gaze upward to the service tier. He watches the human service worker, Lena Vasquez, for approximately 4 seconds. He then turns and walks across the main floor toward the service tier access stairs. Pause in transcript. Duration 7 seconds. Priest Sultan, my lord, the music is resuming. Sovrath does not respond or look back. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. I had composed myself. I had it together. My face was under control. I had the bottle level. I was looking at the far end of the tier and thinking about nothing except putting one foot in front of the other and doing my job. And then I heard footsteps on the access stairs. The access stairs are the service stairs. They're not meant for guests. They're narrow and practical and marked with the station's standard service signage. No guest in the history of the Convergence Ball, I would later learn, had ever climbed the access stairs. I turned around. He was already at the top of the stairs. This close he was, I don't have words that aren't ridiculous. He was very large. Not just tall, but the kind of large that is density, presence, something that takes up more than its physical space. The black and silver of his formal dress caught the dome light in a way that made it look like he had been assembled from night sky. His eyes, when they found mine, were that deep dark red that I had noticed from below, and up close there was a quality to them that I did not know how to categorize, not threatening, not warm, not curious exactly. Evaluating, but not coldly. More like someone who was genuinely paying attention. He said something first in Dacath. I don't speak Dacath. I said, and I promise this is exactly what I said. I'm sorry, I only speak Standard and a little Brillian. He looked at me for 1 second. And then he switched to Standard without any hesitation. His Standard was flawless, better than mine probably, with this precise formality that made every sentence sound like a decision. He said, "Are you hurt?" I said, No, I'm fine. I'm sorry about the noise, the panel latch." He said, "You recovered quickly." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said, "Thank you, I'm sorry for the disturbance." And then he said the thing that I still don't entirely know how to explain. He said, "Would you dance with me?" I saw him go up the stairs. The entire Dacath section watched him go up the stairs. The entire Dacath section then looked at each other in the way that people look at each other when they are not sure what they are seeing and are collectively waiting for someone else to interpret it first. The music had resumed by then, a selenth piece, very light and floating. Most of the delegates had returned to dancing or conversation. About a quarter of the room was still watching the access stairs. When Sovrath came back down with the kitchen worker beside him, walking at his pace, just slightly behind him and to his left, the way the entire Dacath retinue walked behind him, the quarter of the room that was watching became the whole room. I have been to many events. I have seen many things generate that particular quality of silence. It is a specific silence, not the silence of nothing happening, but the silence of too many people simultaneously realizing something and simultaneously choosing not to be the first to react. That silence lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Priest Sultan, the same young court member who had laughed, said something in Dacath that my partial translation tells me was something along the lines of, "Is the king unwell?" And that broke the silence, because other people laughed and then others joined, and it moved through the room in that particular viral way that mockery has when people feel socially safe enough to participate. I should be clear, it was not the whole room, it was not even a majority of the room. But it was loud enough to constitute the room's reaction, if that makes sense. The way a crowd's response gets shaped by its loudest elements. The Dakith delegation was the loudest. Several of the court members were openly laughing. There were comments, I caught fragments, about kitchen staff, about the absurdity of it, about what it would look like for the king of the Dakith sovereignty to dance with a human service worker. The human service worker in question was standing at the edge of the dance floor next to Savrath. Her face was something I will not forget for the rest of my career. She was not crying, she was not shrinking. She was doing that thing that people do when they have decided to simply be present in a terrible moment, because running is not an option. Absolutely still, chin at a particular angle that I recognized because I have held it myself in difficult rooms, and she was looking at the dance floor and not at the people laughing. Savrath was looking at the people laughing. From the deposition of Commander Rath Eshen, Aurelia Station Security. My job that night was threat management. We had 3,700 people in that room, most of them either very powerful, very armed, or both. My focus was on the perimeter, on the access points, on any anomalous readings from our sensor array. I was not monitoring the social dynamics of the dance floor. When the laughter started, I initially registered it as background. Events generate noise. Laughter is not a threat, move on. Then my second-in-command, Yell Praxis, grabbed my arm and pointed at the dance floor. I looked. King Savrath was standing at the edge of the floor with a human staff member. Half the room was laughing at them, or at him. The other half was very still in that way that precedes either something very good or something very bad. I immediately flagged it as potential incident and began moving toward the floor with my team. I want to be honest about what I thought was going to happen. I have seen Dakith responses to disrespect. Their culture has complex protocols around honor and insult, and a Dakith of Savrath's rank being publicly mocked, even by his own delegation, has historically preceded responses that require significant cleanup. I was preparing for an incident. I was wrong about what kind of incident it would be. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. I want to describe what it felt like to stand there, because I think people who weren't there might imagine it was one of those things that seems awful but is actually fine, or that I was too overwhelmed to register it properly. I registered it fine. The laughter it has a texture, that kind of laughter. It is not the laughter of something funny. It is the laughter of people performing superiority, performing distance, and when you are the thing they are distancing themselves from, it has a specific weight. You feel it in your face first, this heat that wants to become tears, and you make a decision about whether to let it, and I decided no. I was holding the wine bottle because I hadn't put it down. I don't know why I hadn't put it down. I suppose there was some part of my brain that was still technically on duty and was holding the wine bottle as evidence of that. Savrath was next to me. I wasn't looking at him because I was looking at the floor and trying to keep my breathing even, but I could feel him next to me the way you feel a wall, this solid, present thing. He said quietly under the laughter, "You can leave if you prefer." I looked at him. His face it wasn't angry. I had expected anger or coldness or some kind of royal displeasure that would result in someone being punished. But his expression was simply watchful. He was looking at me with that same evaluating attention I'd seen at the top of the stairs. He said, "You do not have to stay." And I looked at the laughing faces, and I looked at him, and I said, "I don't entirely know where this came from, but I meant it when I said it. I'd still like to dance if you're offering." The expression that crossed his face was quick. I almost missed it, but it was, for just a second, something that was very close to relief. He offered me his hand. From the deposition of Ambassador Cora Thesson. I watched him offer his hand. I watched her take it. The laughter was ongoing. Several members of the Dakith delegation were by this point performing open contempt. One of the senior advisors had turned away entirely, which in Dakith culture is a significant gesture. Priest Sultan was saying something to the person next to him that I could not hear, but that had the quality of commentary. Savreth walked her onto the dance floor. I want to describe this precisely because I think the precision matters. He did not rush. He did not look angry or reactive or embarrassed. He walked onto his own dance floor the way he had walked into the room, unhurried, aware, deliberate, like the laughter was whether present, noted, irrelevant. And then the music changed. The 7th piece had just ended. The rotation was supposed to go to a Brazilian composition, something with heavy percussion that would have been, tactically, very difficult to dance to gracefully. Standard practice would have been for the station music coordinator to simply play the next scheduled piece. The music coordinator that night was a human woman named Sari Ohan, and I interviewed her afterward, and she told me that she looked at the dance floor and made a decision in about 2 seconds. She switched the rotation. She played a human piece instead. An old one. I'm not an expert on human music history, but she told me it was from their pre-space travel period several centuries back. Something with strings, something that moves like a slow river. I had not known until that moment that human music could do what it did to that room. From the deposition of Sari Ohan, station music coordinator. I saw him walk her onto the floor and I thought, I am not playing a Brazilian percussion piece right now. I am not doing that. I have a library of 40,000 pieces from 60 species. I know what music does to a room. I know how it shapes what people are able to feel and what they're willing to feel. I needed something that would strip the laughter out of the air, not drown it out. Music doesn't drown anything out, not really, but reset the emotional frequency of the space. Give people something to follow other than the mockery. I went to the human archives. I found Barber's Adagio for strings because I have always believed, privately, that if there is one piece of music in all of human production that can make any sentient being feel something, it is that one. I have played it for Gravathi. I have played it for Thelians. I once played it for a Dorvian collective observer who had no ears in the human sense, and they told me afterward, through their translator, that they had felt a change in their internal fluid dynamics that they could only describe as sorrow. I turned it on. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. I didn't know he could dance. I didn't know anything about Dakith cultural practices around dancing. I didn't know if they danced at all. He could dance. Not in the human style exactly. His movements had a different quality, longer and more deliberate, something with his spine that was more vertical than human dancers tend to be. But he knew how to hold a partner. He knew where to put his hands and how to create the frame and how to communicate direction through pressure rather than words. And when Sari, I didn't know her name then, I learned it later. When she switched the music and Barber came through the speakers, he paused for just a half step. I looked up at him. He was listening. He said very quietly, "What is this?" I said, "It's old, human music, Barber's Adagio for strings." He said, "It sounds like something remembering itself." I didn't say anything to that. I didn't know what to say. We kept dancing. The laughter had stopped. I noticed that first in my body, this kind of physical ease, like a pressure that lifts when you weren't fully aware you were feeling it. The sound had changed in the room, and the absence of that laughter was so distinct I almost looked around to confirm it. But I didn't want to look anywhere except where I was. The laughter stopped within about 40 seconds of the music change. I don't have a clean explanation for that from a security perspective. Music affects crowd behavior, we know this, it's documented, but the speed of it surprised me. It was not gradual. It was more like a switch. The barber piece came on and the sound of the room shifted, and the laughter didn't fade so much as it simply became the wrong frequency for what was happening. I held my team at the perimeter, still alert, but the nature of what I was watching had changed. The pair on the dance floor, Sovrath and the kitchen worker, were the only people dancing. The entire floor had cleared, not because anyone had been told to clear it. They just had. That happens sometimes with a strong enough moment. The crowd creates space for it instinctively. 3,700 people in that room, and the only sound was strings and the soft movement of two people on a dance floor. I have worked security for 21 years. I have never experienced anything like it. From the deposition of Senior Protocol Officer Vehadas. My job that night was to make sure nothing went wrong. Something was going wrong in the most remarkable way I had ever seen something go wrong. The Dacoth advisor who had turned away had turned back. I watched this happen. He turned away, which is, as I said, a significant gesture of contempt in their culture. And then the music started, and within 20 seconds he had turned back around. He was watching the dance floor with an expression that I cannot characterize because I am not fluent in Dacoth nonverbal communication, but it was not the expression he had been wearing when he turned away. Pre-Sultan had stopped talking. Two of the other court members who had been laughing were simply standing and watching. I moved quietly through the room checking on delegations. The Gravathi observers were standing very still, which in their species indicates emotional attention. They go still when something is affecting them. The Selanth delegates had clustered together, and several of them had their secondary sensory appendages extended, which is what they do when they are processing something complex. The Vardosian observer had started crying. I don't say this to be dramatic. I say it because it is what happened. She was standing near the east wall and she had her hands pressed together in the Vardosian gesture of witnessing, which they use at funerals and births and significant moments. And she was crying in the quiet Vardosian way, without sound, just the liquid at the eyes. I have overseen 11 convergence balls. I have never seen a Vardosian cry. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. I don't know how long we danced. Time was doing the thing it does when something is actually happening, not stretching exactly, more like becoming very precise. Each moment its own full thing. He was very good at not making it weird. That sounds like a strange thing to say about a 400-year-old vampire king who had just walked up service stairs to ask a kitchen worker to dance in front of 3,000 political observers. But he was good at it. He danced the way someone dances when they have decided this is what they're doing, and they're not going to perform uncertainty about it. I asked him at some point in the middle of the piece, because the question had been in my mind since the stairs. Why? He looked down at me. He knew what I was asking. He said, because they were wrong. I said, about what? He said, about the value of recovery, about what grace looks like. He paused, about who deserves to be on this floor. I looked at him for a second and then I looked away because I was pretty close to crying, and I absolutely was not going to cry in the convergence hall. He added, quieter, and because you said yes when you didn't have to. The piece was winding down by then. The strings were doing that thing they do at the end of the adagio where the sound just opens, like the music is looking at something very far away. I said, does this cause problems for you? He said, undoubtedly. He didn't sound worried about it. Security footage transcript, camera array J7 through J12, timestamp 21, 41, 52 to 21, 44, 08. The barber piece concludes. Duration of dance sequence, approximately 7 minutes 30 seconds. At conclusion, King Sovrath and Lena Vasquez separate. He steps back, she steps back. The room remains silent for approximately 4 seconds after the music ends. Then applause. The applause begins in the southeast quadrant, source identified as the Gravathi delegation, who produce applause through a different mechanism than humans but at the same social function. It spreads. Within 12 seconds, approximately 60% of the room is applauding. The Dacoth delegation is not applauding. 3 members are standing very still. Priest Sultan has moved to the edge of the group and appears to be looking at his own hands. Sovrath turns to face the room for a moment. He does not bow, which is not a Dacoth custom, but he inclines his head once, a gesture that in Dacoth protocol means something specific. I checked with a Dacoth cultural specialist. The gesture, acknowledgement of a witness who has seen something true. He then turns back to Vasquez and says something that is not captured clearly by the audio due to ambient applause. The applause was the easy part. The hard part came at around 11 p.m. when I received a formal communication request from the Dacoth delegation's senior advisor, a senior figure named Veth Sovrel. I want to be transparent. I expected a complaint. A formal protest, possibly. Questions about the appropriateness of the music change. Something about the station's obligation to maintain dignity protocols. What I received instead was something I had to read 3 times before I understood it. Senior Advisor Sovrel wished to know, on behalf of the Dacoth court, whether it would be possible to identify the kitchen worker who had danced with the king, and whether she might be available for a brief audience. Not from the king, from the court members who had laughed. I asked for clarification. The communication I received in return explained that several members of the delegation wished to offer a formal acknowledgement. In Dacoth culture, I learned that night, there is a specific ceremony, quite old, apparently predating their spacefaring period, for acknowledging that you have behaved without honor in the presence of someone who has behaved with it. They wanted to perform this ceremony for a human kitchen worker. I sat at my desk for a while and stared at the wall. Then I found Vasquez. She was back in the catering staging area, helping pack up service equipment, and I explained the situation to her. She said, "They want to do what?" I explained again. She said, "I'm not in trouble." I told her she was not. She said, "Okay." And then she said, "Can I finish packing this first?" She gestured at a stack of glassware. I told her yes. I went back to the communication channel and told Senior Advisor Sovrel that Ms. Vasquez would be available in approximately 20 minutes. I will answer your questions, but I want to first say something that is not an answer to a question, but that I feel should be stated. In the court of the Dacoth sovereignty, we study history. We study it at length. The history of our species is 4,000 years of documented record and oral tradition that extends beyond that. We know our own past. I know because I have studied it what it looked like when my species was young, before the compact, before the space lanes, when we were new to the galaxy and didn't know which way was up and made, as young species do, mistakes, many mistakes, some of which still carry weight in the historical record. I thought I had learned from that history. I thought knowing it was the same as learning it. Standing on that dance floor, watching that piece of music do what it did, watching a human woman hold herself with that particular dignity while 3,000 people looked at her, I understood that I had known the history and not learned it. It is different, knowing and learning. I understand that now in my body rather than just in my mind. I laughed at her because I had decided she was less. I decided she was less in approximately the same time it takes to notice someone stumble, which is not very long, and I had not examined that decision at all. It was reflexive, comfortable, the kind of thought that lives below thought. The king saw what I did not see. He saw it from the beginning, from the moment she caught herself on that column. He saw something worth attention, and he paid it, and the room watched, and eventually the room understood. I have been asked whether my feelings about the formal acknowledgement ceremony are genuine or political. I understand why that question is asked. I want to answer it carefully. They are genuine. They are not comfortable. Genuine and comfortable are rarely the same thing. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. The ceremony was, I don't have the right framework for it. It was in a small side room off the main hall, just me and Savril and Priest Soltin, and two others who had been part of the laughter. Torvin came with me because I asked him to, and he stood in the corner with his 4 arms crossed, and his expression that I later learned, from people who know Brilliance better than I do, means I am paying very close attention and I will remember all of this. Savril explained the ceremony. It was old, pre-spaceflight, used for situations where a person of rank had failed to see the worth of someone they should have seen. The acknowledgement is not an apology. Savril was careful to explain this distinction. An apology in their culture is for harm caused to an equal. The ceremony was for something more specific, for the failure of perception itself. What it involved, practically, was each of them standing before me and saying a phrase in Dacath that Savril translated in real time. The translation came out as something like, I saw you as smaller than you are. This error was mine. I correct my sight. And then each of them looked at me. Really looked at me. Not the way people look at you when they're waiting for you to react to something they've done. The way people look at you when they are actually trying to see you. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't completely. Priest Soltin was last. He was the youngest of them. I hadn't realized how young until the side room without the formality of the main hall. He looked maybe in human equivalent mid-20s. He said his phrase. And then he said in standard, I laughed first. I said, I know. He said, I am sorry for that. And then he caught himself and said, the ceremony does not include apology, but yes, I am sorry for that. I said, okay. He looked uncertain, like he wanted the okay to mean more than it meant, or less, I wasn't sure. I said I accepted. He looked relieved. Very young, relieved. I understood something in that moment about how performance and belief can come apart, and how uncomfortable it is when they do, and I felt something that I did not expect to feel, which was a kind of sympathy. He was only performing certainty. He hadn't known until the music that he wasn't sure. At approximately 23:30 station time, cameras on the upper observation deck registered 2 individuals, King Kale Sovrath of the Dacath Sovereignty and Lena Vasquez, contract grade C7 kitchen and service staff. The observation deck is a publicly accessible area of the station. No regulations prohibit access. I note this for the record only because the footage exists and I am required to document its existence. They stood at the observation window for approximately 40 minutes. I have not included transcript of their conversation because the upper deck audio capture was at minimum resolution, ambient sound only, no clear speech, and I did not feel it appropriate to attempt lip-reading analysis on what was clearly a private conversation. I will say only this, the body language visible in the footage, and I am not a body language expert, I am a security commander, so take this for what it is, did not suggest a diplomatic conversation or a formal exchange. It looked like 2 people who had found each other interesting, standing next to a window and talking. That's all. From the personal journal of Lena Vasquez. He found me after the ceremony. I was back in the staging area. The ball had wound down. Most of the delegations were moving toward their transport bays, and I was doing what service staff does when an event ends, which is clean up and try not to think too hard about what you just experienced. He appeared at the service entrance. He had taken off the outer layer of his formal dress. There's apparently an inner layer that's more like regular clothes, which somehow surprised me. I don't know why. He looked, I want to say more human, but that's wrong. More like himself, maybe. Less formal. Still very large and very red-eyed and not remotely human in any physical way, but with the ceremony of the evening stripped back. He said, the observation deck is open. I said, okay. He said, "You haven't seen the star field from this deck. It's at the bow of the station. The view is different from any other point." I said, "How do you know I haven't seen it?" He said, "Have you?" I said, "No." He said, "Then I would like to show it to you if that's acceptable." I looked at my supervisor, who was very carefully not looking at me. I looked at the stack of glassware I had been packing. I looked at the service exit and the direction of the observation deck. I said, "Let me wash my hands." He waited. The observation deck is exactly what he said. It's at the bow of the station, which means the dome curves out into space in a way that feels like standing at the edge of something rather than in the middle of it. The star field is complete, no station structure interrupting it, just the full 180-degree view of the quadrant. We stood there for a long time without saying much. He told me the names of some of the stars, the Dakith names, which are entirely different from the compact designations. Longer, more specific. He said his people named stars based on how they behaved over very long periods of time, which meant that accurate names required centuries of observation, and that many of the names were still provisional. I said, "How many stars do you have provisional names for?" He said, "In this quadrant, most of them. The galaxy moves faster than we expected." I thought about that for a while. I asked him about the ceremony. I asked him why he had made the court members do it. He said, "I didn't make them." I said, "You didn't tell them to." He said, "I told Savril what I observed. What I observed was that they had done something without sufficient thought and that the music had shown them that. I told him I believed an acknowledgement was appropriate. What they chose to do with that, the sincerity of it, was theirs." I said, "Pre-Sultan apologized separately." He said, "I know, he told me he would." I said, "Is he in trouble?" Savrath looked at me with that evaluating expression. He said, "Why would he be?" I said, "He laughed at someone you chose to dance with." He said, "Yes." And then he sat with what that meant for several hours and came to a specific understanding and asked to acknowledge it formally, which is not the behavior of someone whose character is fixed in the wrong direction. He paused. He said, "The ones I watch carefully are the ones who laughed and then went back to their conversations and have not thought about it since. Pre-Sultan is not one of those." I thought about that for a long time. At some point, I asked him the version of why that I hadn't asked on the dance floor, not why he had asked me to dance, why he had come up the stairs at all in the beginning. He said, "Because you made a sound." I said, "My undignified stumble sound." He said, "You made a sharp, involuntary sound that indicated you were in the process of recovering from something. And then you recovered from it without anyone helping you, without asking for anything, without looking at the room to see if anyone had noticed. You just corrected and continued." He looked at the stars. He said, "That is a specific kind of strength. My people have a word for it. We don't translate it directly because the standard approximation loses something. But it means roughly, the strength that does not announce itself." I said, "You came up service stairs in formal diplomatic dress because I caught myself on a column." He said, "I came up service stairs because I wanted to know if the strength was real or if it was the angle I was watching from." I said, "And?" He said, "You said yes when you could have said no. In a room full of people performing social hierarchy as a blood sport, you accepted a dance with someone the room had decided to mock, and you did it with your chin up and your eyes forward and a wine bottle still in your hand because you hadn't had time to put it down." He almost smiled. "I'm almost certain of it." He said, "The bottle was a nice touch." Day following Convergence Ball. 07-14. Formal communication received from Gravathi Cultural Delegation praising the human musical intervention during the Convergence Ball. Specific reference to Sari Ohan by name. 08-33. Communication from Selanth Observer Group requesting identification of the music piece played. Forwarded to Music Coordination. 0902. Communication from Dakath Sovereignty Formal Secretariat requesting copy of Station Service Staff Recognition Procedures. Reasons cited: cultural education. 0945. Request from 3 separate news agencies for comment on the kitchen worker incident. Statement prepared. No comment at this time. Privacy of station staff protected under Article 7. 1012. Communication from Vardosian Cultural Office. Content: a formal record of the event to be added to the Vardosian Archive of Witnessed Moments. This archive, according to the attached explanation, includes approximately 3,000 events in its 4th-century history deemed significant for reasons of cultural or moral instruction. Station Aurelius has been notified that this event will be the 3011th entry. 1147. Internal communication from Catering Supervisor Torvin Kell requesting guidance on standard protocols for staff who have been the subject of a Dakath acknowledgement ceremony, as no such protocol currently exists. 1330. Lena Vasquez, C7 kitchen staff, reports for afternoon shift. From the deposition of Torvin Kell. She came in for her afternoon shift like it was a regular day. I was standing at the scheduling board, and she came through the service entrance and said good morning, and asked if there was anything she needed to know before starting. I looked at her. I said, "Vasquez, you are aware that 3 off-world news agencies have requested comment on you." She said, "I know. My comm unit has been very active." I said, "The Vardosian Archive, are you aware of the Vardosian Archive?" She said, "Someone explained it to me." I said, "You're going to be in it." She said, "I know, it's a lot." I said, "Are you all right?" She looked at me for a second. She has these very direct eyes. I've worked with a lot of humans over the years, and she is one of the more direct-eyed ones, which I mean as a positive quality. She said, "I think so. I'm going to need to think about some things for a while, but yes, I'm all right." I said, "Good. Upper sublevel kitchen prep work, we're behind on the post-event inventory." She said, "Got it." She went to work. That's Vasquez. That's always been Vasquez. To the administration of Station Aurelius. Please extend the following to Ms. Lena Vasquez of your service staff. The Dakath Sovereignty maintains a practice, originating in the 2nd century of the Old Record, of formally recognizing individuals who demonstrate what our cultural tradition designates as unseen virtue, qualities of character that are present without requiring an audience. This recognition is not common. It has been extended in the current generation to 4 individuals, all of whom were Dakath citizens. The Sovereignty requests to extend this recognition to Ms. Vasquez, pending her consent. There is no obligation associated with this recognition, no political implication, no expectation of reciprocal engagement with the Sovereignty or its interests. It is simply this: we saw something worth seeing, and we would like the record to reflect that we saw it. The recognition requires only her consent, and may be transmitted in whatever form is most convenient for her. Please advise.